welcome everybody.
Good morning.
This talk's called Look Into Your Heart Sutra. So yesterday was the 4th of July, and came together, I think it was Archie maybe came up with the idea originally.
Matt.
Oh, it's Matt. Oh, excellent. Came up with the idea originally to chant the Heart Sutra 108 times as our own version of a celebration. We ended up, well, I didn't do the whole, I did about half of it. people over here chanted for about 5 hours and 8 minutes straight, and ended at, the 108 recitations ended at 1:08 p.m. somehow, not planned out, but right on the mark. So this talk will not really be about politics, but will be about freedom. It'll be freedom in the way that the Zen school conceives of it, practices it. And I probably won't say the word freedom again, but that's kind of the overall theme for the holiday and for the talk. So I was asked in regard to the chanting, prior to the chanting of the Heart Sutra, to talk about the Heart Sutra itself. So I thought, yeah, that'd be good. So in this talk, I'm going to touch on some of the highlights of the history of the Heart Sutra, some of the meanings that people have attributed to it, the meanings that are in it, that come out of it, and also how we practice it, how we use it as a tool to further our Zen practice. So, like most things Buddhist, it starts with the Buddha walking around India with his group of monks in the 5th or 6th century before the Common Era. He's just walking around, getting asked questions, giving talks. And these talks were gathered together and memorized by his cousin, Ananda, and they were transmitted mouth to ear for a few centuries, all the way to the 1st century before the Common Era in Sri Lanka, when they were finally written down. And it's at this same time, the 1st century BCE, that what we would call, or what we do call, the Mahayana Sutras first started to appear in India. They have a slightly different emphasis than the Pali Canon teachings. So in the Pali Canon, the supreme goal was to become a monk, practice hard, become an arhat, gain enlightenment, and just disappear from the world, like go into nirvana, wherever that might be. The people that were in the Mahayana looked at that and said, I think there's a different way. They looked at the actual life of the Buddha, as told in the Pali Canon, how he would be reborn over and over and over and over and over again, burning off all of his unskillful karma. So the early Mahayana looked to that and said, that's what we want to do. That's the Bodhisattva path. So they ended up taking the Bodhisattva vow, where we're just going to keep on coming back to samsara, being reborn until we can save everybody. Everybody can go into nirvana at the same time. So that's like one of the big elements that kind of differentiates the Mahayana from the Pali Canon teachings. And there are several, but the other main one is the teaching of emptiness. Emptiness was talked about in the Pali Canon. It's slightly different. The Buddha only really ever talked about emptiness of self. There is no kernel of self that's in us. But everything else in the world, like podium and computer and phone, these things are actually the real things that exist out there. The Mahayana said, actually nothing at all has a self. Everything is completely made up of various causes and conditions that come together, and the thing holds together for a little bit and falls apart, but there's no real essence of computer out there. There's no essence of self out there, no essence of anything. Everything is intimately bound up with everything else through this like bubbling chain of causes and condition that extends throughout the universe. So within the broad category of Mahayana or Mahayana sutras, there are different types of sutras. And one of the types that is important for the Zen school are the Prajnaparamita sutras, of which the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra both are kind of well-known examples. And there are a bunch that are just called the Prajnaparamita Sutra in various lengths. There's Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, in 25,000 lines, in 100,000 lines, in 200,000 lines. The 200,000 line was the sutra. It's like the biggest one in the Chinese canon. It's considered the most magical of all the Prajnaparamita sutras. It has the most power. Let me see. Yeah, it's in all about 40 Prajnaparamita texts were written between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 7th century of the Common Era. So about a 700-year span that these 40 or so texts were written in, at least the ones that we still have available to us. So the thing that kind of sets a Prajnaparamita text apart from just your regular Mahayana Sutra, again, well, Bodhisattva path, emptiness, but there's also this focus on direct experiential knowledge of ultimate reality. It's not about book learning, so it's going to start sounding like Zen. It's not about book learning. It's not about learning these gigantic lists of terms, which is something that some of the Polycanon guys were doing back then. But really seeing, not even just seeing, experiencing this, the conditioned nature of all things, how everything is intimately linked together with everything else, and that there is no solid kernel of me anywhere, or solid kernel of anything anywhere. Everything is just all bound together. We'll talk about more of that in a bit. The Heart Sutra itself, so that's how the Prajnaparamita texts are a little bit different than your regular Mahayana text, is that direct experience. And what makes the Heart Sutra a little bit different from the other Prajnaparamita texts is that it is something that is called a digest text. So in China, when you have these, you have a sutra that's 200,000 lines, you kind of want to have a way to study it and work with it that doesn't require you reading, like, I don't know how many scrolls that would be, but it's big. So they started to condense, like Reader's Digest versions of sutras, and would make them smaller and smaller and smaller. So the Heart Sutra is a digest text of the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 25,000 lines. So about 40% of the lines that are in the Heart Sutra that we have, the little guy, are in the 25,000 line Prajnaparamita Sutra, and then about 60% are new additions. Yeah. So the earliest, we used to think that it was written in India and then brought to China, but it does seem, and the scholars are still kind of fighting it out, but it does seem that it was digested in, condensed down, China. Possibly in the 3rd century of the Common Era. There is a record of a Heart Sutra existing at that point, but that version doesn't exist anymore. The earliest version that we have is from the 7th century on a stela. I think it still exists, like a big standing stone, and the Heart Sutra is literally carved into its face. So the 7th century, so the 600s of Common Era, we have the Heart Sutra stele, plus we have the most famous story that's associated with the Heart Sutra, which is the journey to the west of the Chinese Buddhist monk Xuanzang. His journey I'll talk about in a second, but it became like a folklore story after the fact, and then it ended up being written and turned into a novel, I think in the 1600s, and being considered one of the classics, one of the 4 classics of Chinese literature. Still being retold to this day, over and over again. If you've seen any of the movies with Monkey in them, that's an adaptation of the Journey to the West. Dragon Ball Z, apparently. See, if you know what that is, that's an adaptation of the Journey to the West. So it's still culturally relevant, like to this very day. So what Xuanzang did, well, a little bit of background is the way that China got its sutras from India. It just happened to be whatever Indian monk happened to like travel overland or on the waters, just would have sutras with them. There you go. That's how you got the sutras. Someone just had an armload of them, like metaphorically, but maybe literally. Sometimes a backpack, and just brought them to China. And then they translated them, and, copied them. They copied them. Apparently, a lot of copying was going on sutras. So it ended up, and this started around the year zero of the Common Era, when like Buddhism first kind of peaked into China. And over the centuries, people brought more texts. But by the 7th century, they hadn't even had a full Vinaya yet, which is the monastic rules, right? The 250 plus rules for the monks and the 300 plus rules for the nuns. So they had questions about it, and Xuanzang was like, I want answers to these questions, and the only way it's going to happen is if I take the journey to the west, to India, and find Vinaya scrolls. And it was very dangerous. The emperor said that he couldn't go, but he snuck out. He made his way over through the Maklan, I think it's called the Maklan, through the desert, over the mountains, and finally into India. There was a king that tried to kidnap him at one point. There was robbers he was hiding from. All sorts of crazy things happened, but he made it, and he ended up living, I think, for 15 years, give or take a couple years, at Nalanda, which is the big training monastery, basically the Buddhist monastic university that was in the north of India. He stayed there for over a decade, studied Sanskrit, studied all these texts, all these different schools, and ended up bringing back over 600 scrolls to China. When he got back, he started with what became the most influential and I think the largest translation bureau of Buddhist texts in Chinese history. And from this, new schools of Buddhism were born in China that hadn't existed there. Like the Yogacara school became very big. He had many Prajnaparamita texts that he translated, and kind of that whole scholastic tradition, the Zen that we know, eventually kind of became a reaction to that. That's like a whole other story. But he influenced so much stuff. When people asked him, because a lot of monks would go to try to get to India and back, and they would not make it. They would get killed, or they get lost, they would get sick, they just never came back. So a lot of them were, but he made it, and people said, well, how did you make it back, there and back? It's so dangerous. He said that before he left, he learned the Heart Sutra from someone in Sichuan province, which is way up in I think the northeast, if I'm correct. And its magical powers kept him safe. He just chanted it over and over again when something dangerous would happen, and the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas would protect him. Must have, because he got there and back with all these scrolls. So yeah, that's the year 700, and then from 600 or so, then we zoom to the present day. I found a quote from Lion's Roar, which is kind of nice. It puts the Heart Sutra into perspective. It says it's recited every day in almost all Mahayana temples in Japan, China, Korea, and Vietnam. I would also say America. It doesn't say that, except for the Pure Land School doesn't chant it for whatever reason. I don't know why. If I ever find out, I'll let you know. And it has been recited there every day for about 1,600 years and more. So it's a very important sutra for Mahayana schools. So that's a bit on the history. So I'll touch on a little bit more about what people have thought what they have considered the Heart Sutra to be. So a sutra, of course, although in our version of it, the Buddha doesn't appear, which is strange, because usually a sutra is a record of something, a teaching that the Buddha has given. There is a longer version that was made a little bit later that puts an intro and an outro on it, where the Buddha does in fact appear. So it's considered a sutra. It is a digest text, so it's a condensing down of a larger sutra. It's a magic spell, and it's been considered a magic spell in the past. It's in this next one I'll touch on in a minute. It's a bit of a manifesto against the earlier schools of Buddhism. I think I might have already talked about that a little bit. And it's a summary, or the heart, quote unquote, of the Buddhist teachings, kind of seen through the lens of the Mahayana school. And here, heart is literally Hridaya, so the Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra means heart. And it's not so much this heart, like the emotional heart. It's more about that digest thing. It's taking the message from a gigantic sutra and finding what its heart teaching is, and then expressing it as succinct a way as possible. Although when you practice it, then the actual heart part also appears from the practice. So I was going to go over a couple different lines in the sutra, but it turns out I'm just going to talk about the very first line, because when you talk about having a digest text and trying to crush the teaching down into as small a bit as you possibly can, if you just focus on the very first line, you basically get a summary of all the rest of the teachings from the sutra. Although in the past, people tended to focus on the dharani at the very end, the agate part at least for the students of Shuji, my Dharma sibling Shonshin, is really emphatic that the first line is what it's all about in the Heart Sutra. So the famous first line goes, Avaloki Teshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajna Paramita, clearly saw that all 5 aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. So I'm going to take each part of that and kind of explain it individually and then come back together and explain how it all fits together and how that leads into our practice. So Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is the Bodhisattva of compassion. It's as if the feeling of compassion or the practice of compassion was manifested into an actual being. So that's Avalokiteshvara. But when we are practicing the Heart Sutra, that compassion that she represents is just the compassion that we have, or that we create through our practice. So it's talking about us as well. When deeply practicing Prajna Paramita, I have to ask, what is Prajna Paramita? I talked about it a little bit, but it's seeing the world through the eye of emptiness. So this is where the Heart Sutra turns into a little bit of a manifesto. This element is directly in the text, but hidden. So if we have difficult emotions, if we experience difficult emotions in our life, like anger, the way we tend to look at it in the Mahayana school is that we see how it's not just this little particle of anger that appears in our body that we can like just pull out and throw away. We study it and we see its dependent nature. We see all the causes and conditions that need to be there before that lead up to the anger. So anger just doesn't appear out of nothing. In that anger is somebody said something to you that upsets you. That is in the anger. The reasons why this person said that, those are in the anger. This person's whole family is in the anger. All the skillful and unskillful ways that we've learned over the years to deal with anger are in that anger. The actual physical sensations of the anger are in that anger. All the words that kind of bubble up and in reaction to this stimulus, to something that somebody said to us, and in reaction to the feelings in our body, like, oh, I don't like that, I got to get rid of that. Oh, no, why'd you say that? And, I'm getting so upset at you for like doing that. All that's in the anger, so that's our karma bubbling up. So the anger is not just this little thing that is there, but it's like hooked to our entire lives and the lives of everybody we've ever known, the lives of everybody that the other person's ever known. Like basically the entire universe is like in this little bit of anger. Now the school that the people that wrote the Heart Sutra are reacting against said that there is actually a little particle of anger that exists independent of all those causes and conditions. And their practice was to kind of then cultivate other like particles of like of peace or compassion that would kind of fight with the with the anger particle and make it dissolve away. But the early Mahayana were like, that's not how it is at all. So then they wrote, that's why they say like, there's no ear. They start with the physical, there's no ear, there's no eye. Because there's no little particle of ear that makes an ear an ear. The ear is full of just everything, right? It's full of, my parents are in this ear, my grandparents are in this ear, all the food that I've ever eaten is in this ear, the very air is in this ear, space and time are in this ear. So it's basically it's trying to make us not think of things as being just little solid objects, but as looking at the whole Indra's net basically of causes and conditions that lead to this right here. It's a very different perspective. Let's see if there's any other thing. Yeah, so Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, our compassion, when deeply practicing prajnaparamita, when we're seeing how everything is so intimately connected with everything, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty. Five aggregates are a way that the Buddha developed to talk about what a person is without reference to a self. So it's basically a collection of psychophysical constituents that make up a person. So the form is just physical form. Sensation is how we judge any, like, it's not too bad. You can also have the option of, ooh, I really don't like it, ooh, I really do like it, or just gonna ignore it. Perception is how we name things and how we create names. Like, I know this is a computer, that's perception. If I'd never seen a computer before and someone explained it to me, that's also perception. Mental formations is just karma. It's all the old ways we've learned how to act in life that we just bring up in any particular situation. Like, if you get upset when someone says a particular thing to you, that's a mental formation, because that's, oh, you're like, I could get upset about it. I'm going to get upset about it. And then consciousness is basically like our life force. It's what's keeping us alive. So the Buddha in his five aggregates teaching is saying that we are made up out of these five pieces. And in those five pieces, there's no separate little kernel of self that holds them all together. They just hold together for a while and they fall apart. And that's what we can consider to be us. So, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, our compassion when deeply practicing prajnaparamita, seeing how everything's intimately connected together, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty of a self or any independent existence, seeing how we are just like everything else. We are made of all these different pieces, and thus relieved all suffering. So, the question would be, how does seeing the conditionality, the dependence, all the individual pieces that make us up, how does seeing how we are so intimately connected with everything relieve suffering? So this is where our study of the Heart Sutra crosses over from just like thinking about it and studying about it to actually practicing it. So when a difficult situation occurs, a lot of times you've got different options, different unskillful options for dealing with it. You could just be like, ooh, I'm so stupid. I'm the stupid one. Or you could be like, ooh, I hate you. Why did you do that? Or you could be like, this situation is terrible. Like, why am I in this situation? So instead of seeing the constellation of causes and conditions that have coalesced into this particular situation that we find ourselves in, we tend to abstract out a me, or a you, or a this, or a that we can anchor our emotions onto, right? Like blame, feels good to blame when you're upset. Like that, you're kind of like crafting this little piece of like you, from all the constituent elements of your entire life, just you right here, I'm mad at that. So this is inherent in our, what we call perceptual faculties, our skandhas, just the way that our mind and body is set up to conceptualize and interact with the world. We have these assumptions that, things, people, places, thoughts, ideas, emotions, they exist independently of everything else. So like when I'm mad at you, quote unquote, I don't see your mother who did the exact same negative thing to you. I don't see that. I don't see her father that did it to this person's mother. I don't see all these behaviors going all the way back to the beginning. I don't see all the different societal formations that are set up to keep these negative or unskillful behaviors perpetuating. All I see is you, just this little thing, you, this abstract essence that I can be mad at. Now, all this doesn't mean that we're not accountable. That's the thing with Zen. I tend to say that your karma, the way that you have been taught and learned and just even genetically encoded to behave in any particular situation, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And this is kind of that spot that like makes life difficult and help set the ground stage for suffering, because if it's not my fault, then it shouldn't be my responsibility, but it is, because you're the only one that is able to deal with this whole karmic mess that all of us inherit from our parents and from just the universe, really, society, history, genetics. So yeah, karma sets like the possibility of conception of options that we have in any particular situation. And if you are given a very unskillful set of karmic ideas about or ways to behave in any particular situation, life gets real tough. That's why we have the Dharma. The Dharma is this whole other option, this whole other set of behaviors that we can now study and learn to use in order to kind of combat these unskillful ways of behaving that we inherit. Yeah, when we look with compassion at the causal and conditioned nature of like everything, we can suddenly see like how intimately bound up everything is. The past bound up with the future, with the present, with our emotions. Like when I'm talking to any particular person face to face, I'm talking to their parents at the same time. I'm talking to their parents when their parents were adults. I'm talking to their parents when their parents were children. I'm talking to basically like the entire universe through this particular person, all the web of conditions. It's a very different way of looking at what people are and how to interact, all kind of coming out of this sutra. Let's see. I have more on practice. So, getting down to the nitty-gritty of the practice itself. So that's the setup for the practice. What is it that we actually do, like to actually bring all this conceptual thought and these ideas about how things are so causal and conditioned out? Like, what do we actually do to make this like real in our everyday lives? For us, it's zazen. The answer is always zazen. If you have a hammer, right, every problem in the world looks like a nail. If you have zazen, every problem in the world looks like something you could sit with. And the funny thing, well, at least as far as suffering is concerned, it's a great hammer, and it's been honed over millennia to really hit that nail in. It's through zazen that we can cultivate this compassion that I've been talking about. It's how we cultivate prajna, right? Seeing through the eye of emptiness. It's how we investigate the skandhas, our physical and emotional and mental makeup. It's how we can investigate the causal and conditioned nature of everything we come in to contact with, and it's how we can relieve our suffering. So like, how do we do that? So within this sometimes tumultuous mental and physical tempest of everyday life, there is a great stillness that lies beneath it. And sitting and facing the wall is one of the most effective methods that I've found for discovering this stillness. The stillness that's always been there. This is when the Heart Sutra says, all dharmas are marked by emptiness, they neither arise nor cease, are neither defiled nor pure, neither increase nor decrease. That's talking about this fundamental stillness that rests not beneath, but on the other side of the form and emptiness. So the form is like all this crazy things, all the roiling emotions and thoughts that we have in the world and all the crazy things that are going on out there. But the emptiness is the other side, intimately bound up with it, that is still. Nothing's happening there. It's just quiet. That being said, the zazen is not necessarily about cultivating a calm mind. It's not necessarily about, I felt like a Buddha when I was sitting on the mat today. You might just be like, I feel like whatever the opposite of the Buddha is, a human being is like, or like a regular untrained human being. The tumult, I almost want tumult, right? Within that is this stillness, and it doesn't seem like it because we get so caught up in the waves of craziness, like there's a storm going on up above in the ocean, but if you're like deep down in the water, like it's very peaceful right here. That's kind of how our zazen can function. So if you've ever done long distance racing, or not racing, well, running, long distance running, you know, your feet are just like slapping on the ground, bam, bam, you're breathing all hard, and like wind blasting in the face, and there's all sorts of sound. Like all of a sudden you're like, and all you are you're just running, and it's just like, damn, I'm like really at peace. That's kind of an example of this stillness. But this can happen anywhere. If you're at the factory sometimes, and no matter how much it sucks, all of a sudden you're just like, huh, wow, this is strange. I'm not upset. My feet, they hurt, but they don't hurt. You know, or if you're in an office and it's like everybody's gossiping or whatever's going on, there's all the boss is screaming at you, and you're just like, I think I'm good. Like this is that stillness. That stillness is always there. We tend to think of that maybe as something that's like a product that we could kind of manufacture and hold on to, but it is inherent in just all of that craziness that's going on. It's the emptiness side of it. Yeah. So when we sit on the mat for a really long time, say our foot goes to sleep, or our back hurts, or our nose itches, or sometimes I get like an itch inside of my ear. Like my body is screaming that it's a bug. It's not a bug, but it feels like it. And you can just not do something about it. You can just sit there and let it be. Like that's training for the compassion of Avalokiteshvara, of seeing all these different parts of our body that are trying to get us to just do anything. Just do something about it, right? When we just don't do something about it, but just sit there in the moment, just letting it be what it is, that's us training ourselves in a more skillful path, right? When we see ourselves, our bodies and minds just going haywire, trying to get us to do anything at all to just get that foot to not be asleep anymore, just to scratch, just to do one of these guys, like, oh. This type of thing's happening all the time, right? That's how we react to our karma. Our karma pops up and like somebody says something to you and you're just like, ooh, I don't like that. That's your karma. It's basically like a little itch. It's the same type of thing. And if you have sat on the mat for hours and days and weeks and years of just, you're like, damn, that thing really itches, and you just don't do something about it. You just let it be. You can then have that option. It gets imprinted into your karma, and you have that option to do that as well at any other point in your life. So it creates a gap between the impulse, whatever causes you to be upset, and your reaction to it, right? You see it. It's like, bah, someone says something, you're like, you might even hear the karma go, ooh, say something nasty to them. Give them a slap or scream at them, do something. Maybe some people, that's like my reaction, to get upset. Maybe cry, maybe say something terrible about yourself in your mind, something like that, right? But you can hear that and just be like, you know what? No. I'm not going to do the unskillful thing. I'm going to just let this be. And maybe there is something that you should do in the situation, but with this calm heart and mind, you are able to then think about it for a second and choose wisely, hopefully, how to respond. That's the compassion again, the Avalokiteshvara from the very first sentence. Just keeps coming back and back, coming back and back. It might not look like compassion to say it, but it's honoring this particular person. Like, you don't know what this maybe you do know what this person's gone through. If you do know what this person's gone through, then maybe you have more compassion, or a reserve of compassion already. But to see them, not just to see them. See, that's the issue. Not to see, you see their entire life right in front of you. That's like this whole new way of interacting with people. It blossoms out of the sutras. That, I mean, there's so we have the entire universe inside of us, like at this very moment. It's like if somebody, what I wrote it down, I like this. Even when someone insults you, it requires the totality of the universe conspiring together to offer up that insult. So that might make it even worse. After I've said it, I'm like, the entire universe is insulting me through you. But on the other hand, you have the entire universe backing you up, different backing up, be able to ask, what's the most skillful thing to do in this situation? Like what honors the entirety of all being? What is conducive to peace and awakening in this very moment? And that's in easy moments. Well, sometimes even quote-unquote easy moments, just normal run-of-the-day, it can be difficult. But in difficult situations, it's good to have had that training, because then that's when it really shines. Because that's where karma really, if you think about how animals are and how people have been, like the karma is it shines, or whatever the opposite of shining is in difficult situations. Like these things come out, these unskillful actions come out when you're really stressed. But if you've been sitting at zazen for so long, your zazen, your compassion can shine instead of the unskillful karma. And that's basically the heart of the Heart Sutra, is this compassion that is cultivated through the study of our own elements of self, right? And seeing how we are led by the nose, by our karma, and we see how we are so susceptible to that, and we are also able to see how everybody else is as well. That's with that we come to the end of the talk. Are there any questions?